Hello viewers, and welcome back to another budget gaming build video. Now this is a revised version of the previous video I made on a budget gaming build which cost 2,350 reals. Now this build was specifically for MrTwitchEffect here, and however, thanks dude, I saw the video. I am still a student. I don't think I can afford a 2,350 real build. Can you please make one for 2,000 to 2,220? So he went to Softland, picked out a few parts, now, and it amounted to 2,160 here. Dude, instead of the Thermaltake, can I go for a normal generic case that will affect my system? Now, what I'm concerned with normal generic cases is poor ventilation. With poor ventilation, you get heat buildup. Heat buildup is not good for your components, especially if you're looking to overclock. Heat is your biggest enemy. It's good ventilation and cooling of the system that will encourage long life of your components. Now, as for the power supply, which is stated here, Corsair VS500, my strong advice is no, don't go for this power supply. This is not an 80+ certified power supply. It's just about enough to power up an office system with maybe a really weak graphics card inside there for multiple displays of an office system, and that's about it, a 6450 and so on. Main reason being that yes, it is a 550 watt power supply, but it has such a poor single 12 volt railing with only 22 amps on that single 12 volt rail, and that's not what you're looking for. Just to make sure, that's 12 times 22, which would amount to only 264 watts, and that's not even enough to power up a gaming computer, so no, don't pick that. So instead, I made a revised version. What I did was step a tier down so that you can go to the next lower level of budget gaming builds. Now, as I'm stating here, think of this as the absolute bare bones minimum, okay? Stripped down to the lowest acceptable spec. Gaming at 1080p may be difficult, and in some cases you may have to turn off anti-aliasing altogether. So here's the build. What's different now about this build is instead of the i3-3220, you have a Pentium G840. This is a Sandy Bridge Pentium. The highlights of the CPU is that yes, they range from 2.8 to 3.1 GHz. The only difference from the i3-2100 is the lack of hyper-threading, which you do not need in games. You do have support for 1333 MHz memory, so that's a good feature. As for that reminds me, yes, reason why I went for this is if you go up over to Tom's Hardware and see their latest build, you will see here that they have used the Intel Pentium G850 instead of the i3-2100 or i3-3220 as well. Reason being that this is a very capable gaming CPU, and you shouldn't see any bottlenecking if you go with a relatively mid-range graphics card. Other feature I want to highlight is I previously stated I'd use the Corsair CX500. However, what's different about this build is I've opted instead for the Antec VP450. What's different is the Corsair CX500 was 290 reals. This instead is 190. I was a bit hesitant at first to go for that, but then I found that actually Tom's Hardware is using this power supply for their latest budget gaming build, consisting of the Pentium G850 and an AMD Radeon 7850. The highlights of this build, yes. What does it have? This power supply. It's a dual 12 volt 18 amp, which doesn't seem very good, but since it is a dual 12 volt combined, you'll get 30 amps. Combined, you'll get 30 amps, which is 360 watts from 450. So yes, it just falls into the category of 80+ 35, being exactly 80% efficient. And as Tom's Hardware states here, despite the fact that you need 500 watt for the 7850, it only exposes one 6-pin combined 12 volt rating of 30 amps. That's good. Enough again to cover our power needs with reserve. Very good. Going back now to the list. What's different as well? Yes. You know what? I'd rather open the web page itself to show you each and every build. Going back to our trusty softland.com.sa. So what have I changed now? Motherboard. Instead of a B75 motherboard, you can opt for a H61 motherboard, and this is a Sandy Bridge build. You don't need a B75 motherboard. It's 100 reals cheaper, which is good. Now keep in mind, this is a micro ATX motherboard. It's not a full ATX board, but what to do? You're cutting down price, this is what you should expect. Moving on to RAM now. RAM, I stated, what do we have here? Gigabyte G8xx okay. RAM, instead of G-Skill Aris, you can go with 1333 MHz of RAM. And yes, instead of one quantity here, you have to put it as two quantities, since keep in mind this is one stick of RAM, alright? It's 2 gigabytes, you'll have 2 gigabytes, you'll have two 2 gigabyte sticks. So running as dual channel 4 gigabytes. And that will be for 45 reals. Now, as for hard drive, we'll stick with the usual Western Digital Caviar glue. Can't go any lower than that. Power supply, yes, Antec VP450 for 190 reals, alright? As for the case now, what I've looked at the case. Softland has the Silverstone Mid-Tower SST PS05. No picture available, unfortunately, for 185 reals. I've looked up this case and actually it's not bad. Take a look here. Here is the PS05. What are the highlights of this case? Yeah, it's quite elegant looking. If we take a look at the guts here, what do we see? Yes, there's a good amount of space for even a full ATX motherboard. Since you'll be going with a micro ATX motherboard, it will be about this big. Won't look, what can I say? Won't be the best sight, but since this is a closed case with no side panels, that won't matter. And you have a nice side orientation for your hard drives here. Moving on. Yes, here's the side of the case. As you can see, there are no vents on the side and there is no side panel window. Not sure how much that would affect the graphics card, but if you could throw in a couple of fans, maybe if you're looking to overclock, that should be alright. Same goes to the other side. Plain, nothing at all. Now, as for the back here, let's take a look. Back panel, I'm not sure if that would be enough for cable routing, but you should be able to stuff the cables right here behind the hard drive cages, because your Antec 450 VP is a non-modular power supply. What else can we look at? Yes, it is a bottom-mounted, it has a bottom-mounted power supply, and it is included with a fan. What else have we got? Ah no, this is the side panel version edition, don't look at that. Anything else I missed out? I feel I missed out on something. Yes, here we go, more detailed look. What this is here, this is the top of the case. Fortunately here, you do have two mounts for, two top mounts for fans up here. So that will help with the ventilation of your system. I myself, when I covered my Thermaltake V3 Black Edition, the top vents, to see how that would affect temperature, when under fur mark, temperature skyrocketed, went up by 10 degrees. From, I think it was, yes, from 65 up to 75. That shows how important top vents are. What else have we got? Incidentally as well, this does come with USB 3.0 up on the top. These are the I/O, the input-output is on the top of the case, which is pretty nice as well. Power button, two USB 3.0, headphone and microphone jack. Have I missed out on anything? I guess that's it. Top fan slots, yes. So what this is here, this is like a cover on the top of the case. Remove that, and here are your fan vents exposed. And fortunately, yes, you have two of them. That's good. And that should be about it. One more, toolless mounting, yes, is still included. This is actually a pretty decent case for the price. It's 185 reals versus 220 for the Thermaltake V3 Black Edition, and it actually looks quite decent. Only thing missing is a side mount for your fan and a side panel window, which is not important. You wouldn't want to have a side panel window when you have a micro ATX motherboard there. It just wouldn't look good at all. I know myself, I have a micro ATX motherboard which I'm not very pleased with, and I'm looking to replace it with a full ATX motherboard for that sake. So, moving on now. Last thing that we haven't mentioned is the graphics card. Now, what's different about here is I've used the Sapphire 7750 instead of the 7770, yes. And Silverstone and so on. It all amounts in the end to 1,740 reals, which is $464, so pretty good for a sub $500 budget gaming build. Now, if we were to look at alternatives, probably add a bit more since this is a $500 budget gaming build. If you have some more money to spare, the first thing I'd look at is to upgrade your graphics card. To what? Alternative. Swap your 7750 for the 7770. Add 70 reals, which in my opinion is worth it really. The only step above the 7770 is the 7850 for 350 reals more. So I mean, and this is only 70 reals more for a lot more performance, or a good bit more performance, if not a lot. So if you were looking to put in a bit more money, do not ignore upgrading your graphics card. The other option you could do is add, instead of 2x2 GB of G-Skill, add 2x4 GB, so you can have 8 GB of RAM, and that way you will never run out of memory, you'll have more than enough. And that adds up to 80 reals more. In total, that's 1,890 reals, which is exactly $504. That's just $4 of our budget that just cuts it, so we can stop there. We could say that this is a $500 build that we could go with. So if you're looking to go as cheap as possible, you can go with this build for $464. Now you can keep in mind that it's still okay in terms of how balanced it is. You do have a Pentium dual core, a fast dual core, with a relatively modest graphics card. Good combination actually. And you have a basic gigabyte motherboard. It doesn't really matter what the motherboard is, as long as you get a basic gigabyte motherboard. Keep in mind micro ATX as well. 4 gigabytes of RAM, which is dual channel 2 gigabytes. This is enough for gaming. In some instances you just may run into limitations with video editing software, for example. 500 gigabytes, Lite On. Fortunately, as I said, you can step down on the graphics, you can step down on the power supply and go with an Antec VP450. 30 amps on dual 12, it's dual 12 volt rails with 18 amps. A combined amperage of 30 amps, which is 360 watts, and that is enough for your gaming, considering how energy efficient the G800 series is, as well as the Sapphire 7750. This has no 6-pin connector. You just put it into the PCI slot, PCI Express slot, and there, it's ready. Bam. So this is as cheap as it goes, $464. If you're looking to spend a bit more to bring it up to $500, upgrade the graphics card and add in more RAM. So that sums it up to 1,890 reals, $504. So there you have it, folks. That's your $500 budget gaming build. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and have a good day. Bye now.